But before that, I wanted to talk to you because I am obviously also a writer, jumping on the bandwagon of my book.
Yeah.
And my books deal with the non-binary. And I hadn't read a book in which anybody took that concept of non-binary, which comes from kind of gender discussion and activism and academia, and applied it to mixed heritage or to the many other things that you apply it to in your book. And I wondered if you could talk a little about that for our audience.
Yeah, just that little thing.
Yeah, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I think I realized like when I was, so after that first video of me speaking Punjabi, the comedy skit went viral, I felt like I had two options that were available to me. One option was become like some Instagram comedy influencer person and chase brand deals. And that just like, I felt like it was like the jaws of a beast opening up. And I was like, oh, I don't think I want to jump into that. And I sort of felt that there was something potent to the Both Not Half idea. So I just took basically the summer to write a personal essay. You know, this was before the TED Talk, before the book was even an idea. And I just spent the summer like just figuring out what is the story? What has led me to articulate Both Not Half? Let me make sense of it for myself. And in doing that, that's when I was writing that essay, I sort of getting to the conclusion of it, had this realization that this was sort of like a non-binary way of thinking. And I'd been exposed to ideas of non-binariness through exposure to like queer communities, and also, you know, very personally through my relationship with my sister, who's a queer woman, in a relationship with a non-binary partner. And it just made me I'm just trying to like think about the timeline now. But I was just very aware that this Both Not Half was a sort of a non-binary way of thinking. But then when I came to and I sort of touch on this at the end of my TED Talk, I sort of talk about how, you know, ideas of being whole and multiple can apply to like lots of different areas in our lives. And, you know, I talk about I said gender and sexuality, but I didn't really go into any detail. But when I came to writing the book, I like really like went into that in like a lot more detail.
And you talked about class as well, which I thought was so interesting.
Yeah.
Class dynamics. And you said racism is an expression of class inequality.
Yes.
Which felt like a really succinct way of talking about, you know, where if you have any kind of hierarchy or any kind of binary, then it creates room for other discrimination.
Like in a super simplified way, you know, like race as an idea was invented at a time when ideas of human equality were being pioneered. And they were like, right, so we sort of believe in human equality, but also we're enslaving people.
How can we keep some of this inequality which made us so rich?
Yeah. So if we sort of create a hierarchy of humanity, then maybe we're sort of equal, but, you know, some are more equal than others. And then you get, you know, racism, scientific racism. But sorry, yeah, just to come back to the thing of the non-binary stuff, where I really realized how that there were parallels and a lot to be explored in terms of like my experiences and my sister's experience of like finding her pride as a queer woman was after, you know, one of the experiences I talk about in my TED Talk and in the book is about my feeling of alienation at a Punjabi wedding in 2015, where I was, you know, it was like a family friend's wedding. I was having an amazing time. And then I saw this, I was on the dance floor, dancing, like having a great time. And I saw this young girl staring, young Indian girl staring at me. And I could just tell from her expression that, or at least what I projected onto her expression, was that she didn't understand or couldn't comprehend what I was, this sort of like Bhangra dancing white man. And I'd had like the experiences throughout the night where like Punjabi uncles had like accosted me trying to get me to like speak Punjabi for their WhatsApp group chats. And, you know, I was sort of being used to shame kids who like don't speak the language. And I just found the whole experience like really alienating. And this was at a time when I was trying to find a sense of home and belonging. And I was talking to my sister about that afterwards. And she sort of just looked at me and went, this is your first experience of being othered, isn't it?
Mm. I really like that about your book as well, that you say that that's what happened with your sister, because she had so many experiences of being murdered.
And I really realized in that moment, I was like, wow, this sort of like one-off experience that's sort of becoming like a turning point for me that I'm going to eventually turn into a book deal is her everyday experience.
Yeah.
And that was deeply affecting. It had a real lasting impact.
And it feels like the idea of non-binary, applied as you applied it, can be used to reconcile lots of irreconcilable ideas, as well as the idea of like, I really want to talk about my Punjabi heritage and my English heritage and how I am both at the same time and not half. But I can also acknowledge that privilege that I carry that my sister doesn't carry.
Yes.
And so it makes you think about why people feel the need to, in identifying one way and with one group of people, does that necessitate not identifying with other people and pushing people out, and where that comes from and why?
Yeah. I think I've really come the whole journey with Both and a Half has really made me deeply understand and advocate for the fluidity of identity and the fact that identity is not fixed and static. I think that was one of the big things I took away from my research, my writing, was this, that it's like a dance. It's this constantly evolving thing. And to sort of think of it as something that is fixed and static is really, I feel like that's where most division comes from, is from the trying to enforce these dividing lines. And I think this is where it sort of became quite natural that these conversations came out of my discussion of mixed heritage or mixed race history, is because actually the policing of dividing lines is where division happens, and the existence of people that straddle those lines are felt as a threat. And so, with the rise of scientific racism, like you had I think Sita Balani puts it very well in her book Deadly and Slick, about like the mixed heritage person becoming like the site where the fiction of race becomes visible. Because you've got this person who is like, who clearly doesn't fit into either one or the other. And that then becomes, that's why, alongside scientific racism, you have, or all race laws tended to have like anti-miscegenation laws, like, trying to legally enforce and stop people from mixing.
But if you have a mixed heritage child, it's like, oh my God, they can mate. They're the
same.
Yeah.
And it's and I think it's the this thing coming back to this, like the idea of the non-binary, is that these are all instances that or lived experiences that make it just so abundantly clear that these are just narratives. These are
and
just
it is
stories.
liberating. I think that it's all about people are expected to conform to these very narrow sort of definitions, and this sort of gets back into some of the nationalism thing that we think this is how you should be English, and this is how you should be Scottish or British or whatever. And if you're outside of that, then it's like, oh, that's un-British or un-English and so on. So, but you said you sort of had this journey where you sort of became aware that nationality was a construct. And you said it was one that you didn't really need, and then you had to sort of stop and revisit that. I think you were sort of, it reminded me of the awful phrase from Theresa May calling us citizens of nowhere.
Yes, which I think I do quote.
But you kind of come back around and think, well, actually, I am from somewhere, and this is important to me. So where have you ended up now? I mean, you sort of, how do you define your nationality?
So it's interesting. Like, in terms of my citizenship, I assert my British identity. That is my citizenship. I think of it in very political terms of like what that means. As a British citizen with rights as a citizen, and well, I mean, we're technically, I guess, felt more to be subjects rather than citizens. But that's me asserting my citizenship through my British, I guess, national identity. I think I also really have come to embrace my English identity, because, well, firstly, to sort of push back and disrupt ideas of what it means to be English. I think also just because English is itself a mixed heritage identity.
Yeah.
And so I feel kinship with that, you know. It was a mix of Angles, Jutes, Saxons. Anglo-Saxon is a hyphenated word. Celtic Britons, like, yeah, to be English is to be mixed. So I don't actually feel weird about embracing that. But it's really it's contextual. It's like, you know, what am I at passport control? I'm British. Like, what am I when I'm dealing with laws which only apply to England? I'm English.
You make some interesting points about this sort of what should be the immutability of citizenship, this sort of more recent idea about stripping people of citizenship.
Yeah, so just to give a bit of context, I guess. So I was really struggling with my idea of national identity for a long time. Like when I was figuring out, you know, around like 2016, I think I was like trying to reconcile my... Oh yeah, it was because I was doing a play, and I had to send off my biography. And pretty much all biographies that I was looking up on Wikipedia was like, you know, so Ian McKellen is an English actor, or Sachin Tendulkar is an Indian former international cricketer. And it was like, it's like you've got your job, and the sort of the main adjective is your national identity. So I felt like it was this sort of immutable part of reality that I had, and I had to sort of have one and describe myself. And so I wanted to describe myself. I initially described myself, well, I'm a British actor. That seems to make sense. But I was like, there's this, because I was trying to figure out ways to assert my Punjabiness or Indianness like into my work. I was like, that doesn't quite, I feel like a bit of me is like missing there. So maybe I'm a British Asian actor. And I was like, British Asian's like not really, I don't think people think of British Asian as what I look like. And around that time, Riz Ahmed had just been on like a US chat show where he'd spoken about, you know, I'm not British Asian, I'm British. This is what British looks like. And that felt really powerful for somebody that looks like Riz Ahmed to state that. But for me, it felt like I was like hiding a part of myself. And then I was listening to some lectures on like ideas, like 19th century, like the formation of ideas, because, you know, I'm a nerd and that's what what I listen to. And I came across this one lecture where they were talking about how national identity was essentially invented. You know, in the wake of industrialization, the breakdown of traditional communities, people needed another sort of meaning. And national identities.
This part of the book was so interesting to me because I didn't know about, you talk about Whig history and Peterloo, and can you talk a little bit about that for people who haven't yet read the book?
So initially, I discovered that national identity was sort of like a construct. And as I say in my TED Talk, I was like, it's a construct that I didn't need. And so I sort of reject it. And so rejecting it was how I came to reconcile my British identity and my sort of Indian heritage. Then I come back from India and doing the TED Talk, and I'm, you know, it's Brexit's kicking off, got the COVID the corona's kicking off, the pandemic. And I feel like I sort of care about my country. I feel like there's something to that. And I had to interrogate it. And so I went back and I sort of waded through Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities and discovered really that national identities emerged at this time in history where identities were evolving and like nation states were emerging. And it really struck me that like national identities were this sort of really powerful, imagined like technology of mind, which sort of allowed They just sort of emerged as these really interesting identities at a time when the world was evolving.
I think you said it was a national identity, a cultural technology that brings us together around a common purpose. I thought that was such a succinct way of putting it.
So and so I didn't feel like that was inherently wrong. I think it's quite useful to have something that can bring us together with a common purpose.
And like you said, during COVID, it was like, man, are we all on this rock together?
Yeah.
You know, we're certainly connected.